As children continue to struggle economically following the Great Recession, in more than half of the developed world, childhood poverty rates have increased since 2008. To explain why, I talked with Shailen Nandy of the University of Bristol.
Well, a lot of the problem has come from obviously falling out from the recession, where policies put in place to fix the economies of countries often have detrimental effects on children. What we're seeing is a replay effectively of policies that were put in play in the 1980s and 1990s in many developing countries, which, for example, the cutting back of public services. Children are disproportionately affected by cuts to public services because they rely on them for healthcare, for education. And so in a number of countries, like we're seeing in Greece, in the UK as well, we've seen cuts to public spending on children and their families. This is contributing to an increase in child poverty across many countries in the rich world and also in the poor world.
You're in the midst of a study looking at poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. What are some of the themes that you've found there?
Over the last 15 years, what is undeniable has been an increase in inequality across many of these countries following policies imposed by international organizations. What we see in some countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example in Nigeria, malnutrition rates over a 15-year period not reducing at all. In other countries like Ethiopia, we're seeing a halving of child underweight over a similar sort of period. So high rates of rural to urban migration, mainly because of poverty in rural areas, driving people into urban areas in the search for jobs, are leading to the growth of slums and urban informal settlements in which children are having to live in very overcrowded, very dirty, very dangerous conditions. This is contributing to high mortality rates and high rates of poverty.
Around the world, some 1 billion children lack access to a basic necessity of life, and those items include food, clean water, shelter, and health care. How does poverty impact a child?
Poverty is possibly the worst or the greatest determinant of child survival. Children living in poverty live in overcrowded conditions, living in dangerous neighborhoods, living in areas where they don't have sufficient water or sanitation. You can imagine the impact on a child's physical development if they have to walk 15 or 20 minutes to a river or a spring to collect water for their daily use. A large proportion, around a third of households, lack access to even basic sanitation, which means children learning to walk, living in households with mud floors, will be susceptible to diseases as a result of insufficient sanitation around the area. In addition to this, poor children tend to be sicker, tend to fall out of school earlier. Not receiving an education limits your longer-term prospects of getting a good job. Good jobs, when they come along, are not particularly well paid, and so there's a rather vicious cycle that poverty begins and keeps people down for all of their lives.
Here in the United States, we found out this week that 22% of children were living in poverty in 2013. That is up 5% from 2008. How can that be fixed?
Well, part of the problems, a majority of children living in poverty are actually living in households where one or both parents are actually working. A key driver of poverty in the United States are the low wages paid to a majority of the people working there. So one way of reducing child poverty at a stroke would be the increase or provision of a child benefit or child tax credits, which would see the household incomes rise, improve their purchasing ability, and reduce poverty that way. There are also better conditions for work or secure, cheap childcare facilities enabling parents to ensure that their children are looked after during the day, allowing them to go out to work.
Dr. Nandy, thank you so much for your insight from Bristol.